Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment indicating where you're watching from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. Tennessee's misty mountains, with their ancient brooding forests and labyrinthine valleys, conceal not only timeless legends and generations of whispered folklore, but also living nightmares that stir in the deepest shadows. In the 1880s, a group of unsuspecting travelers, driven by the era's relentless spirit of exploration and the elusive promise of untapped riches, stumbled upon a village not found on any map, a place utterly divorced from the burgeoning march of civilization. The villagers' initial, unsettling hospitality quickly gave way to pure, primal terror, for an ancient, insatiable entity lay waiting beneath the very heart of the mountain, its hunger growing with each passing day, its insidious influence seeping into the very bedrock. No one who truly entered its domain ever returned alive and unchanged, their minds, bodies, and souls irrevocably altered. So if you were them, lost in the suffocating embrace of the wilderness, would you dare to enter that village, to approach the source of its terrible secret? The Appalachian Mountains, a vast and ancient range stretching across the eastern United States, have always been a land defined by deep mystery, stark beauty, and isolated, fiercely independent communities. Their towering peaks are frequently shrouded in an ethereal, almost spectral mist, their labyrinthine valleys cloaked in perpetual shadow even at midday, creating an atmosphere ripe for the germination of local folklore, untold secrets, and a sense of pervasive, ancient dread. For centuries, these mountains have harbored communities that chose, or were perhaps forced, to live apart from the rapidly modernizing world, their ways of life clinging tenaciously to traditions as old as the mountains themselves. They were the last bastions of a fading era, guardians of forgotten ways. Within these forgotten hollows, the countless hidden coves and the seemingly impenetrable groves of primordial forest, far away from the prying eyes of progress, away from the telegraph wires and railroad tracks that were reshaping the nation, some dark truths were allowed to fester, to grow into something far more sinister and consuming than mere legend. These were not simply quaint superstitions, they were palpable, undeniable realities. In the 1880s, as the American frontier pushed relentlessly westward, vast swathes of the Appalachians remained defiantly wild, untamed, and largely uncharted. This was particularly true for certain remote, almost mythical corners of eastern Tennessee, where the winding cold rivers cut deep, treacherous gorges, and the ancient forests grew so dense, so inextricably intertwined, that sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, creating a world of eternal twilight. It was here, in a valley so secluded, so perfectly concealed it defied conventional mapping, that the village of Havenwood existed. Havenwood was not merely isolated, it was intentionally hidden, purposefully excised from all official records and public knowledge, its very existence known only to its stoic inhabitants and perhaps to something far older, far more powerful, and infinitely more malevolent than man could ever comprehend. The villagers, numbering perhaps 50 souls, were mostly the direct descendants of early Scots-Irish and German settlers who had sought refuge from the encroaching, ever-changing world centuries ago, fleeing religious persecution or economic hardship. They lived a life steeped in archaic customs, their speech often an old dialect, their beliefs deeply ingrained, almost pagan, in their reverence for the mountain itself. They were bound by blood and by a shared, unspoken, terrifying burden. Their homes were rough-hewn log cabins crafted from the very trees of the forest, their clothing homespun, dark, and practical, their faces weathered and unsmiling, etched with lines of hardship and a chilling stillness. Their eyes, a uniform shade of dark gray or brown, held a peculiar, unsettling emptiness, a deep, watchful silence that suggested a profound inner detachment from the human world. They farmed small, meager plots of land, hunted the abundant game of the vast forest, and bartered sparingly with the rare, brave trapper or itinerant peddler who dared venture close, always at a designated, distant, and heavily guarded spot on the valley's perimeter. They kept fiercely to themselves, intensely private and ferociously protective of their solitude and their secret. At the literal and spiritual center of Havenwood, nestled against the jagged, imposing foot of the tallest peak, known locally as Sentinel's Maw, lay a narrow, jagged crevice, a gaping wound in the earth, barely visible amidst the moss-covered rocks and ancient primordial trees. This was not just a geological formation, this was the gateway. It was not a conventional cave, not a forgotten mine shaft, but a natural fissure in the very bedrock of the mountain, impossibly deep, exhaling a constant cold draft that smelled faintly of ozone, wet earth, and something indescribably ancient, mineral, and disturbingly alive. For countless generations, stretching back into a past lost to recorded history, the villagers of Havenwood had been its self-appointed guardians, its gatekeepers. Their sacred duty, passed down through generations of oral tradition, encoded in their cryptic rituals and etched into their very being, was to ensure that nothing from the gateway ever entered their world, and conversely, that nothing from their world ever disturbed what lay, silently waiting, within. But this protection, this eternal vigil, came at a terrible price, a horrifying cost measured in souls and sanity, a price that outsiders sometimes tragically paid with their very existence. The year was 1883. The searing pain of the Civil War was a fading yet still deeply scarring and profoundly painful memory for the nation. The relentless promise of land, untapped resources, and economic opportunity was drawing people deeper and deeper into America's wild, untamed heartland, pushing the boundaries of civilization further each year. But vast swathes of the Appalachians remained defiantly wild, untamed and largely uncharted, defiant bastions of primeval nature. This was particularly true for certain remote, almost mythical corners of eastern Tennessee, where the winding, frigid rivers cut deep, treacherous gorges, and the ancient forests grew so dense, so inextricably intertwined, so primordial, that sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, creating a world of eternal, unsettling twilight. It was here, in this labyrinthine, verdant wilderness, following whispers of forgotten trails and lost mineral veins, that four men, seasoned prospectors and adventurers, found themselves. There was Jeremiah Finch, a grizzled, cynical veteran of the California and Colorado gold rushes, his face a roadmap of hard living and disappointment, always seeking the next big strike. Caleb Vance, a young idealistic surveyor in his late 20s, educated and eager to make his mark, carrying meticulous maps and scientific instruments. Thomas Big Tom O'Malley, a burly, boisterous Irish immigrant in his 40s, known for his booming laugh and prodigious strength, a man who loved whiskey and a good fight. And Silas Greene, a quiet, observant tracker in his 30s, a man of few words but keen senses, whose eyes seemed to see everything the forest concealed. They were on an expedition deep into the Appalachian wilderness, their hopes fueled by unsubstantiated rumors of untapped mineral veins, perhaps even forgotten gold deposits hidden in the remote, unnamed ridges of eastern Tennessee. For weeks they had battled dense undergrowth, treacherous ravines, the biting cold of autumn nights, and the deceptive, winding labyrinth of the mountain trails. Their maps, crude and unreliable, were based on old, faded trappers' notes and vague, often contradictory local legends. One particularly dense section of their map marked ominously with a faded, almost erased inscription. Uncharted territory. Avoid. Here dwell things best left undisturbed, intrigued rather than deterred. Them, where there be no maps, there be gold. Boys, Big Tom had jovially declared, his voice echoing through the silent trees, seemingly oblivious to the dark implications of the warning. Following an ancient, almost imperceptible game trail, barely a trace in the thick undergrowth that seemed to twist unnaturally, defying logic through the primordial forest, they stumbled upon Havenwood. The discovery was utterly unexpected, a sudden jarring juxtaposition of wilderness and habitation. As the trees thinned, revealing a hidden valley bathed in the pale, diffused light of a late autumn afternoon, they saw the telltale smoke of cabins rising lazily into the crisp, cold air. A small stream, unnaturally clear and silent, with water so still it seemed to reflect only absence, meandered through the center of the village. The cabins, perhaps a dozen in number, were simple, rough-hewn log structures, surprisingly well-maintained, yet radiating an unsettling air of ancient self-sufficiency and a profound, almost oppressive stillness. Children, their faces serious and unnervingly unsmiling, their movements slow and deliberate, paused their play, if indeed it could be called play, to stare at the newcomers with wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to hold no childish innocence. Men and women, dressed in homespun, dark, heavy clothing that seemed to absorb what little light there was, emerged from their cabins with unnerving silence, their movements slow, deliberate, and perfectly synchronized, their gazes fixed intently, unblinkingly upon the strangers, like predators assessing prey. Jeremiah Finch, ever the leader, his instincts honed by years of frontier life, approached the nearest villager, a gaunt, impossibly old man with a long, white, wispy beard and eyes like chips of gray flint, devoid of warmth or emotion. "Greetings, friend. We are travelers, prospectors, lost and seeking passage through these mountains. Do you have a place for us to rest, perhaps trade for some supplies?" Finch asked, his voice betraying a hint of unease, despite his confident demeanor. The old man, who introduced himself as Elder Samuel, studied them with an unsettling, almost predatory intensity, his gaze lingering for an uncomfortable moment on each man. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth or inflection, yet perfectly clear, like stones clattering together. "Strangers are rare here. You are far from the known trails. You have strayed from the path." Despite the deeply ominous tone of his words, an invitation was extended, a chilling gesture of hospitality. "You may rest. Our hospitality is extended for a time, but you must respect our ways. And you must not venture beyond the village perimeter, especially not towards the maw. The mountain demands respect." The prospectors, weary, hungry, and deeply unnerved but relieved to find any form of shelter, reluctantly accepted. They were led to a small, empty, isolated cabin on the very edge of the village, partially obscured by dense ancient pines. The villagers remained largely quiet, observing them constantly, their gazes following every movement with an unsettling, unwavering focus. There was a palpable tension in the air, a heavy, suffocating sense of being under perpetual scrutiny, like specimens in a jar, carefully analyzed. Yet they were offered hot food, a thick stew of venison, wild mushrooms, and root vegetables, and strong, bitter herbal tea. The food was surprisingly nourishing, but the tea had a peculiar, metallic, almost earthy taste, and left a strange, lingering, tingling sensation on their tongues, a numbness that slowly spread. That night, as the prospectors, despite their weariness, struggled to sleep in their assigned cabin, they heard it for the first time, a low, resonant, almost guttural hum emanating from deep within the mountain, vibrating through the very earth. It was not the wind, nor the distant cry of an animal. It was a rhythmic, almost conscious vibration that seemed to penetrate their bones, their very marrow, a sound that filled the suffocating silence with a palpable ancient dread, an insidious lullaby. It grew stronger, then faded to a barely perceptible thrum, only to return with renewed, terrifying intensity, a slow, deep breath. Caleb Vance, the young surveyor, a man of science and logic, was deeply disturbed by the sound, his usual rationality failing him. "It sounds like a living thing," he whispered, his face pale and drawn in the flickering candlelight. "Something massive, breathing, something underground." The next few days passed in an unsettling, monotonous routine, a creeping sense of unease slowly settling over the prospectors. They tried desperately to gather information, subtly questioning the villagers about the local geology, potential mineral deposits, and the precise location of the maw. But the villagers were evasive, their answers vague, laced with veiled, chilling warnings about disturbing the mountain and the deep sleep. Silas Greene, the seasoned tracker, his senses keenly attuned to the wilderness, spent his days trying to quietly scout the surrounding labyrinthine forest, hoping to find a hidden path, a way out. But each time he ventured too far beyond the village perimeter, a villager would mysteriously appear, seemingly from nowhere, guiding him back with a polite but firm insistence. "The forest is treacherous, stranger. Best to stay where it is safe. The mountain watches." He noticed that the villagers moved with an unnerving, almost supernatural silence, their footsteps barely disturbing the fallen leaves on the forest floor. Their eyes, always watchful, always fixed, seemed to lack a certain spark, a human warmth, a flicker of emotion. They rarely smiled, and when they did, it was a thin, unsettling contortion of the lips, a rictus of forced politeness that never reached their blank, dead eyes. The hum from the mountain was a constant, inescapable presence, sometimes faint, a background thrum, sometimes a throbbing drone that seemed to fill their very thoughts, a low, guttural murmur that burrowed into their minds. Big Tom O'Malley, usually jovial and loud, grew increasingly withdrawn, his booming laugh replaced by a nervous, almost constant cough. He complained incessantly of a persistent, dull ache in his bones, a coldness in his marrow that spread slowly from his extremities, a chill that no fire could ever dispel. Jeremiah Finch, ever practical and driven by survival, noted the strange uniformity of the village. No animals other than a few scrawny, silent chickens, no personal possessions beyond the barest necessities, no signs of individuality, no art, no music, no laughter, no vibrant life. It was a place of stark, unsettling order, a tableau of quiet, oppressive conformity, the first true, undeniable anomaly. The moment when their rational minds began to fray occurred on the 5th day of their unwelcome stay. Caleb Vance, suffering from a persistent, throbbing headache that felt as if an invisible pressure was building inside his skull, and a growing profound sense of unease, decided to sketch the layout of the village, hoping that by imposing order on the physical space, he might calm his racing, panicked mind. As he meticulously drew the cabins, the stream, and the central clearing, he noticed something profoundly peculiar, something that defied the laws of physics, about the villagers who were silently observing him from a distance, their shadows. The sun was directly overhead, at its zenith, yet the shadows cast by the villagers seemed subtly, horrifyingly wrong. They stretched slightly too far, elongating unnaturally, or moved with an imperceptible delay, a fraction of a second, out of sync with their owner's movements. It was a fleeting observation, easily dismissed as a trick of light, a tired mind, or a figment of his growing paranoia, but it left a cold, sickening knot deep in his stomach. Later that evening, during their meager, silent supper, Big Tom O'Malley suddenly gasped, a choked, terrified sound, dropping his spoon with a clatter that echoed unnaturally in the small cabin. His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were wide, dilated with pure terror. "My hand, it's "It's gone cold, like a fish, a dead fish," he stammered, his voice trembling. He held up his left hand, and indeed it appeared unnaturally pale, almost translucent, the veins beneath the skin barely visible, the flesh cold to the touch, devoid of all warmth, as if life had already begun to recede. The chill wasn't just physical. It seemed to penetrate to the very bone, growing, spreading slowly up his arm, an insidious invasion. Elder Samuel, who had been sitting silently nearby, observing them with his usual unsettling stillness, simply watched, his flinty eyes unwavering, utterly devoid of sympathy or concern. "The mountain takes what is offered," he stated, his voice flat, emotionless. "It claims its due. It welcomes its new kin." Big Tom's condition rapidly worsened throughout the night. By morning, his entire left arm was unnaturally cold, numb, and his skin had a waxy, almost artificial pallor, like a perfectly preserved corpse. He complained of voices in his head, whispering promises of warmth, of peace, of belonging, if he would only let go. Surrender to the deep. Jeremiah Finch, now truly alarmed, his cynicism replaced by a cold, hard fear, demanded to know what was happening, what dark magic was at play. Elder Samuel merely repeated his cryptic, chilling pronouncements, offering no aid, no comfort. He is being welcomed. He is becoming part of the gateway. His mind will merge. His suffering will end. The prospectors realized with a sickening lurch of dread that they were utterly trapped. Their horses, tethered near their cabin, were restless and agitated, whinnying nervously, their eyes rolling wildly at the unseen pervasive hum emanating from the mountain. Their rifles, once symbols of their self-reliance and protection, now felt unnervingly light, their dwindling ammunition utterly inadequate against an unseen, incomprehensible foe. That night, the hum from the gateway intensified to an almost unbearable level, becoming a throbbing, relentless pulse that vibrated through the very earth, through their teeth, through their bones, an internal vibration that threatened to shatter their sanity. Big Tom's condition deteriorated further, rapidly descending into a profound, terrifying alteration. He thrashed in his sleep, his body racked with unseen torment, muttering incoherently about cold hands reaching, pulling, and a song from the deep calling him home. The other prospectors, sleepless and terrified, watched him with growing dread, their own sanity teetering on the brink. Silas Greene, the tracker, his senses heightened by fear, noticed another unsettling detail: the villagers' eyes. In the dim, flickering light of their lanterns, he saw that their pupils seemed unnaturally large, almost completely black, reflecting no light, absorbing it, as if they were endless voids, portals to a bottomless darkness. They were like the eyes of a deep-sea creature or something fundamentally alien. The next morning, the space where Big Tom O'Malley had been was empty. His bed was neatly made, the blankets smoothly folded, as if he had never been there, as if he had simply dissolved into the air. No tracks led away from the cabin, no signs of struggle. Only the lingering, cloying, organic smell and the ceaseless, throbbing hum from the mountain remained, a chilling testament to his disappearance. Jeremiah Finch, now gripped by a cold, desperate, visceral fear that numbed him to the core, confronted Elder Samuel outside their cabin. "Where is he? What have you done with him?" "You're murderers," he screamed, his voice raw with grief and terror. The old man merely smiled, a thin, unsettling contortion that didn't reach his black, empty eyes, a smile that conveyed ancient, indifferent cruelty. "He has joined the gateway. He is home now. You will join him soon. The mountain calls. It knows your name. It knows your desires." Finch, driven by a desperate, primal instinct to survive, tried to organize an escape. But the villagers, moving with unnerving speed, impossible silence, and perfectly synchronized coordination, had quietly, meticulously surrounded their cabin. Their faces were utterly expressionless, their eyes empty, their movements precise and deliberate, like automatons. They were not aggressive, not violent, but their presence was absolute, their intent terrifyingly clear. There was no escape. Caleb Vance, the surveyor, usually the one seeking logical, scientific explanations for everything, now frantically scribbled. In his worn journal, his hand shaking so violently that the words were almost illegible, desperate to record every terrifying detail of what was happening before his own mind, his own identity, was consumed. He described the omnipresent hum, the insidious coldness that spread from the extremities, the vanishing shadows, the villagers' empty, abyssal eyes. He hypothesized in a feverish scrawl that the villagers were not actively malevolent in the human sense, but rather conduits, vessels, their individual consciousnesses subsumed or possessed by some ancient geological entity residing deep within the mountain. He theorized that the gateway was not just a physical fissure, a crack in the earth, but a living, breathing, organic organ of this immense sentient entity, a maw that drew in life, absorbing it, transforming it, merging it into its own vast, alien awareness. "It seeks to assimilate," he wrote, his pen scratching furiously against the paper, his words a desperate last stand against oblivion. Not to kill in the way a man kills, but to consume identity, to make all things part of itself, to grow, to expand. He noted with chilling precision that the faint, cloying organic smell was growing stronger in their cabin, now almost overpowering, and he, too, began to feel a strange, spreading coldness in his extremities, a numbness that started in his fingertips and crept slowly up his arm, invading his very core. Silas Greene, the tracker, desperate to find a weakness, a blind spot, any possible way out of their inescapable predicament, tried to observe the villagers from their barricaded window. He noticed that the villagers, despite their unnerving, unyielding presence, never actually entered the cabin. They merely stood guard outside, silent, unwavering, their shadows long and wrong in the pale, oppressive morning light. He also noticed that their movements, while precise and perfectly synchronized, sometimes seemed subtly delayed, almost mechanical, as if they were puppeteered by an unseen force, their actions not entirely their own. This observation, though, fleeting and horrifying, gave him a sliver of terrifying insight. They were not fully themselves. They were mere extensions of something else, something vast and ancient that controlled them, body and mind. This realization, while offering a faint flicker of understanding, only deepened the dread that night, as the hum from the gateway reached a deafening crescendo, vibrating through the very air, through the wooden planks of their cabin, through their bones, threatening to shatter their very sanity. Jeremiah Finch, Caleb Vance, and Silas Greene knew their time was running out. They had spent the day frantically barricading their cabin door and windows with what little furniture and tools they had, but they knew it was utterly futile, a child's game against an unstoppable force. The villagers, they realized, with a sickening certainty, were merely waiting for the mountain's signal, for the opportune moment. The coldness had spread further in Caleb's arm, now reaching his chest, and he muttered incoherently about voices in his head, familiar voices calling his name, promising understanding, offering eternal peace if he would only let go, surrender to the deep, become one with the mountain. Jeremiah, seeing his friend's rapid deterioration, the vacant look in his eyes, knew that time was not just running out, it was dissolving. They fashioned crude, desperate weapons from axe handles, a broken shovel, and sharpened pieces of wood. Under the cover of the deafening, soul-crushing hum and the moonless, starless night, they made their desperate, suicidal attempt to escape. Their plan was simple, born of pure desperation, burst from the cabin, hoping to create a momentary distraction, and run for the hidden, treacherous trail Silas had scouted near the river, a path that might, just might, lead to salvation. but the villagers were waiting. They moved with uncanny speed, impossible silence, and perfectly synchronized coordination, emerging from the surrounding shadows like phantoms, surrounding them in a tight, impenetrable circle. There were no shouts, no threats, no sounds of aggression, just the rhythmic, precise, unnervingly deliberate movements of empty-eyed figures blocking their every path. Jeremiah, roaring with a primal fury born of fear and despair, swung his crude axe handle, striking one villager who seemed to absorb the blow without flinching, its body yielding with an unnatural give. Caleb, screaming, a sound of pure terror and madness, fired his rifle, the shot muffled, almost swallowed by the overwhelming hum. But the villager he aimed at merely staggered, its empty black eyes fixed on him, seemingly unharmed, already beginning to shift. Silas, using his tracking skills, desperate to find an opening, tried to weave through the silent figures, but they anticipated his every move, almost as if they could read his intentions, his very thoughts. They were not fighting back with aggression. They were simply corralling them, herding them like cattle towards an unseen slaughter. The three remaining prospectors found themselves pushed inexorably, relentlessly, towards the source of the deafening hum, the narrow, jagged crevice known as the gateway. As they drew closer, the coldness intensified, not merely a physical chill, but a bone-chilling, soul-sapping presence that sapped their strength, invaded their minds, twisting their thoughts into grotesque parodies. The organic smell was now overpowering, a cloying, sweet stench that made their eyes water and their throats burn, an assault on all their senses. The air shimmered around the gateway, distorting their vision, making the dark, abyssal opening seem to pulse with a malevolent inner, bluish-green light, a beacon of damnation. They could now clearly see crude ancient symbols carved into the very rocks around the fissure, symbols that mirrored the ones Silas had seen in the cabins, swirling and interconnected, pulsing ominously with the mountain's ceaseless hum, almost as if they were veins carrying some dark, unholy blood. Caleb Vance, now barely able to stand, his entire left side numb and pale, his face a mask of serene, terrifying acceptance, whispered, his voice weak and distant, "It's a pattern, a language. It's absorbing us. It wants to know us, all of us." He then collapsed, his eyes wide, fixed on the shimmering, pulsating maw of the gateway, a strange, utterly serene smile gracing his pale lips, a smile of profound, unnatural peace. Jeremiah and Silas, horrified, their own bodies racked with the spreading coldness and the invading whispers, tried to pull him back, but his body felt impossibly heavy, his skin unnaturally cold and waxy, already beginning to change. As they struggled, they saw the air around Caleb's body ripple, and his form seemed to subtly distort, his features elongating, blurring, his skin losing its color, becoming translucent, merging with the shadows. He was being subsumed, assimilated, his very essence becoming part of the gateway, his individual identity dissolving into a greater, alien whole. Just then, a group of villagers, led by Elder Samuel, approached them, their movements still precise, their eyes still empty. Elder Samuel's face, usually so impassive, now held a faint, unsettling smile, a glint of something ancient and terrible, something profoundly alien in his black pupilless eyes. His voice, usually flat and devoid of emotion, now had a subtle, echoing, multi-layered quality, as if many voices spoke through him simultaneously, a chorus of the assimilated. "Welcome, strangers. Your fear feeds the maw, your knowledge, your lives, your very souls. They add to its song. Do not resist. Peace awaits you. Transformation." Jeremiah, fueled by a desperate, primal instinct for survival, saw a momentary, almost imperceptible gap in the villagers' impenetrable encirclement. With a final agonizing surge of strength, he shoved Silas forward. "Run, Silas, get out! Tell them what happened here. The truth!" As Silas scrambled away, his mind reeling from the horrific sight of Caleb's assimilation, Jeremiah stood his ground, raising his broken shovel, a futile, desperate last stand against the silent, empty-eyed villagers and the terrible humming maw behind them. The last thing Silas saw as he fled into the deeper, merciful shadows of the primordial forest was Jeremiah being overwhelmed, his struggling form pulled inexorably towards the shimmering, pulsating gateway, his desperate cries swallowed by the mountain's terrible, all-consuming hum. Silas ran, not looking back, the terrifying image of Jeremiah's fading form and Caleb's serene, corrupted smile burned into his memory, a brand of eternal horror. He ran until his lungs screamed, until his legs gave out, until he stumbled out of the accursed valley, leaving the sounds of the humming mountain and the silent, terrifying village behind. He was the only one who made it out, the sole, terrified witness to Havenwood's unspeakable secret. But what had he truly escaped? The mountain's immediate physical grasp, or merely its slow, insidious psychological tendrils already beginning to root in his mind? Silas Greene ran. He ran until his lungs screamed, raw and burning, until his legs, heavy as lead, buckled beneath him from sheer agony and exhaustion. He ran until the primal, soul-consuming fear that had driven him from the terrifying valley forced him beyond the very limits of human endurance, pushing him into a frenzied, desperate flight. He scrambled through the dense, unforgiving Appalachian forest, the eerie, low hum of the gateway still vibrating in his very bones, a phantom echo in his skull, the horrifying image of Caleb Vance's serene, corrupted smile, and Jeremiah Finch's final, desperate, futile stand burned irrevocably into his memory, a brand of eternal dread. He didn't dare to look back, knowing instinctively that to do so would be to invite the insidious, gravitational pull of the mountain, to risk seeing the empty-eyed villagers, their forms subtly wrong, emerging from the gnarled trees, their shadows, unnaturally long and distorted, beckoning him back. He ran until he stumbled, gasping and sobbing, out of the accursed valley, leaving the terrifying sounds of the humming mountain and the silent, terrifying village behind him, finally collapsing. In a small, remote clearing miles from Havenwood, the exhaustion overwhelming him. He was the only one who made it out, the sole, terrified witness to Havenwood's unspeakable secret, a secret that now clung to his very soul. But what had he truly escaped? The mountain's immediate physical grasp, or merely its slow, insidious, psychological tendrils already beginning to root themselves deep within the fertile ground of his traumatized mind? The distinction, he would soon learn, was a subtle and terrifying one. Silas emerged from the vast primordial wilderness nearly a week later, gaunt, starved, his eyes wide and bloodshot, and half mad with fear, stumbling into a small, bustling logging camp on the remote outskirts of Tellico Plains. His tattered clothes, wild, matted hair, and utterly terrified eyes told a harrowing story of unimaginable hardship and profound psychological torment, but the fragmented, feverish tale he whispered of a hidden village, of silent, empty-eyed inhabitants, and of a sentient, monstrous mountain that consumed souls and identities, was initially met with disbelief, then pity, and finally concerned, hushed whispers among the pragmatic loggers about his sanity. The camp foreman, a grizzled Scotsman named Angus McTavish, a man of practical mind and deep experience in the unforgiving mountains, dismissed Silas's ravings as the predictable product of delirium and severe exposure. The mountains play cruel tricks on the mind, lad, he'd said, patting Silas roughly but kindly on the shoulder, his eyes holding a flicker of something he didn't quite understand. Best to rest, eat hearty, and forget such nightmares. They'll pass with the sun. But even McTavish, a man who scoffed at ghosts, had seen enough of the Appalachians to know that some places, some forgotten hollows, held secrets beyond mortal ken, forces that defied all logic and reason. Silas was given food, water, and a warm, clean bed, but he never truly recovered. He spoke little, flinching violently at sudden sounds, and often stared blankly into the distance, his eyes glazed as if seeing things no one else could, reliving horrors. He never slept in complete darkness, insisting on a small flickering candle burning through the night, its tiny flame a fragile barrier against the oppressive shadows, his eyes darting nervously into the deepest, darkest corners of the room. He complained incessantly of a persistent, deep coldness in his left arm, a chill that was bone-deep, spreading slowly, similar to what Big Tom had experienced, a cold that no fire, no amount of blankets could ever dispel. And sometimes, in the dead of night, he would mutter incoherently about voices, familiar voices, calling his name from the deepest shadows, beckoning him back to the maw. He had escaped physically, but the gateway had left its indelible, chilling mark, a haunting souvenir of his ordeal, etched into his very being. Sheriff Thomas Miller of Tellico Plains, a stern but fair man, accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier justice, eventually interviewed Silas at length. Miller, a veteran of numerous local disputes, cattle rustlings, and the occasional wilderness tragedy, was initially, and understandably, skeptical. His logical mind struggled to reconcile Silas's fantastical tale with the brutal realities of the mountains. However, Silas's vivid, consistent, and utterly terrified account, delivered with an unwavering conviction that defied simple madness, combined with the undeniable fact that 3 seasoned prospectors had indeed vanished without a trace into the very wilderness Silas described, compelled him to act. Miller organized a search party composed of his deputies, a few hardened local hunters accustomed to the unforgiving terrain, and a reluctant, trembling Silas as their guide. For weeks they scoured the remote, labyrinthine reaches of the mountains, where Silas claimed Havenwood was located. They found ancient game trails, hidden hollows cloaked in mist, and dense primordial forest, but no sign of a village, no cabins, no gateway, no trace of human habitation. Silas, despite his insistence, seemed increasingly disoriented, lost in the very terrain he had once navigated with such skill and certainty. "It's as if the mountain itself has shifted, Sheriff," he'd whisper, his eyes wide and vacant, "as if it has hidden the path, pulled the very land around itself." The search was ultimately fruitless, a frustrating exercise in chasing shadows. Sheriff Miller, his initial skepticism partially, but not entirely restored, reluctantly attributed the prospector's disappearance to the treacherous wilderness, a common enough tragedy, and Silas's trauma-induced delusions. The case was officially closed in the county records, coldly marked as "lost in the mountains, presumed deceased." But a seed of profound doubt, a chilling question, had been irrevocably planted in Miller's mind. He couldn't shake the memory of Elias Peterson's raw, unadulterated terror, or the unsettling detail Silas described about the villagers' wrong shadows, their empty eyes. He knew, deep down, that something truly unnatural had transpired. Silas Greene, unable to escape the haunting, pervasive memories of Havenwood, the coldness in his limb, and the whispers in his mind, eventually left Tennessee, drifting westward, always seeking new frontiers, new beginnings, but finding no lasting peace. He worked odd jobs, a hermit among men, always moving on when his haunted past threatened to catch up, when the whispers grew too loud. He died in a small, isolated mining town in Colorado in 1912. A forgotten figure, his death officially attributed to old age and a broken spirit, a quiet end for a man who had seen too much. Among his meager belongings, a worn, leather-bound journal was discovered, its pages brittle with age. Its final, desperate pages, written in a shaky, almost frantic hand, contained entries that painted a chilling and horrifying picture of his last, torment-filled years. He wrote of the persistent, spreading cold in his left arm, now extending to his entire left side, leaving it numb, useless, and seemingly devoid of life. He wrote of the voices no longer just distant whispers, but clear, insistent, seductive. Calls from the shadows growing louder and more intimate with each passing year. They learned my name, he scribbled, his hand trembling. They learned my language. Now they speak my thoughts. They promise peace. They promise an end to the cold. They promise belonging. All I need do is embrace the maw and become one with the song. His last legible entry, dated just days before his death, simply read, "The shadow came for me tonight. It wore Caleb's smile, stretched and wrong. It offered me warmth. It offered me answers. I could not resist. I am finally going home to the maw, to join them." His journal was eventually donated to a small, obscure historical society in a dusty Colorado town, filed away as the deranged ramblings of a traumatized frontiersman never truly understood, its true significance lost to history. However, the chilling, insidious story of Havenwood did not end with Silas Greene's demise. Decades later, echoes of its hidden horror, like a slowly spreading contagion, began to reverberate throughout the Appalachian region, resurfacing in new, disturbing ways. In the 1930s, during the depths of the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, established numerous work camps deep within the Tennessee mountains, sending thousands of young men to build roads, plant trees, and develop parks, a desperate attempt to put them to work. One such camp, Camp Evergreen, a sprawling collection of tents and rough-hewn barracks, was unknowingly established disturbingly close to the very valley where Havenwood once stood, its existence buried under layers of time and fear. The men of Camp Evergreen, young, eager to work, and initially full of boisterous camaraderie, soon began to report strange, unsettling occurrences. Tools would vanish from their tents, only to reappear days later in unusual, inexplicable places. Compass needles would spin wildly, defying magnetic north, leading them astray in even the most familiar terrain. And at night, from the deepest, most ancient parts of the surrounding forest, they would hear a low, rhythmic hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bones, unnerving them profoundly, slowly eroding their sanity. The camp director, Captain William Hayes, a seasoned, no-nonsense military man, initially dismissed these reports as mountain fever, the predictable product of isolation, or the superstitious ramblings of inexperienced youth. But when several men began to complain of a persistent, spreading coldness in their limbs, a chilling numbness that spread from their fingers and toes, and started exhibiting strange, detached, almost catatonic behavior, staring blankly into the dense forest for hours, muttering incoherently about the mountain's call and the song of the deep, Hayes grew deeply concerned. A small medical team from Knoxville was hastily dispatched to Camp Evergreen. Their report, later classified and heavily redacted, noted an unusual and severe psychological strain on the men, characterized by profound apathy, significant memory loss, and a disturbing, almost suicidal lack of self-preservation instinct. The report also chillingly mentioned an inexplicable, rapid drop in body temperature in some affected individuals, without any apparent illness or environmental cause. One particularly cold night, a young popular CCC worker named Samuel "Sammy" Bell, known for his cheerful disposition, his infectious laughter, and his boundless optimism, suddenly disappeared from his tent without a trace. A massive search operation involving every available man and local tracker was launched, but Sammy was never found. Days later, another worker, John J.D. Davis, an experienced woodsman and a man who prided himself on his knowledge of the mountains, returned to camp after a solo scouting mission, disoriented, terrified, and muttering incoherently. He claimed he had stumbled upon a hidden valley, a small village of old log cabins not found on any map, a place that shouldn't exist. He spoke of silent, empty-eyed villagers who watched him without moving, their forms subtly wrong, and of a low, rhythmic hum that emanated from the very heart of the mountain, a sound that burrowed into his mind. "They invited me in, Captain," J.D. whispered to Hayes, his eyes wide and vacant, filled with a strange, terrifying mixture of fear and profound, unnatural fascination. "They said I could find Sammy there. They said Sammy was at peace, that he had joined the maw. He was smiling. Captain, he was so cold, but he was smiling." J.D. then broke down, weeping uncontrollably, convulsing with terror. The horrific image of Sammy's smiling, yet distorted, utterly alien face among the empty-eyed villagers burned irrevocably into his mind. Captain Hayes, deeply disturbed by J.D.'s coherent yet impossible account, especially the chilling mention of a maw that echoed Silas Greene's long-forgotten journal, organized a small, armed expedition, taking only his most trusted men, with J.D. as their reluctant, terrified guide. They followed J.D.'s confused, hesitant directions, pushing deeper and deeper into the uncharted, malevolent forest. After days of fruitless searching, battling their own growing fear and disorientation, they found nothing but endless trees, suffocating fog, and a pervasive, unsettling silence. J.D.'s disorientation grew, his grip on reality slipping further, and he eventually collapsed, muttering about the mountain shifting and the path hiding itself, refusing to be found. Captain Hayes, a man whose military training had never prepared him for such an existential horror, reluctantly had to abandon the search for Havenwood. Camp Evergreen was eventually disbanded, its men reassigned, its terrifying existence a forgotten, disturbing footnote in the CCCC's vast history. But the insidious hum from the mountain and the chilling tales of the coldness and the maw continued to circulate in hushed, fearful whispers among those who had served there, an unspoken warning. In the late 1960s, a new generation of academics, fueled by the era's countercultural curiosity and an increasing fascination with the paranormal, turned their attention to the remote Appalachians. A team of independent folklorists and paranormal investigators, led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant but notoriously eccentric professor from Vanderbilt University, began researching fragmented local legends. Dr. Reed, initially a staunch skeptic but open-minded scholar, was particularly intrigued by the scattered accounts of a hidden village and vanishing people in eastern Tennessee, remnants of stories from the CCCC camps, and old local whispers that defied easy explanation. Her meticulous research eventually led her to Silas Greene's long-forgotten, unsettling journal in the dusty archives of a small historical society. The journal, with its chilling accounts of the gateway and the assimilation, profoundly impacted her, shattering her scientific materialism. Dr. Reed, against the fervent advice of her increasingly concerned academic colleagues, and despite warnings from local historians, organized a daring, privately funded expedition to locate Havenwood, convinced there was a kernel of horrifying truth to the legends. Her team, composed of a handful of equally adventurous students and a few seasoned mountaineers, was equipped with modern surveying tools, early portable recording devices, and a profound sense of adventurous naivete. They embarked on a perilous journey into the uncharted territory. Silas had described a journey into the heart of the unknown. For weeks they battled the unforgiving terrain, the dense ancient forest, and the constant, unnerving silence of the deep woods, a silence broken only by their own fearful breaths. They, too, began to experience strange phenomena. Their delicate scientific equipment malfunctioned erratically, compasses would spin wildly, defying magnetic north, leading them in circles, and a subtle, almost imperceptible low hum began to emanate from the very earth, causing mild but persistent headaches and a pervasive, creeping sense of profound unease. One cold, misty evening, as Dr. Reed's team huddled around a sputtering campfire in a particularly dense section of the forest, their advanced acoustic recording devices suddenly picked up something profoundly disturbing. Not just the now familiar hum, but faint, rhythmic whispers, almost like a primordial chant, seeming to come from all directions at once, from the very air around them. The whispers were in no identifiable human language, yet they carried an unsettling melody, an ancient hypnotic rhythm that seemed to penetrate their very thoughts. The next morning, one of the team members, a bright, eager young geology student named David Hughes, known for his cheerful demeanor, woke up with a profound coldness spreading from his left arm, similar to Silas's account, and a dazed, utterly serene expression on his face, his eyes distant and strangely blank. He began to mutely, meticulously pack his bag, his movements precise and mechanical, almost ritualistic. When questioned by a terrified Dr. Reed, he simply pointed deeper into the forest, towards a specific, impossibly dense thicket that seemed to absorb all light. "The gateway calls," he whispered, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, yet carrying a faint, unsettling echo. "They are waiting. They are all waiting for me." Dr. Reed, recognizing the chilling, horrifying similarities to Silas Greene's long-forgotten account, now utterly convinced of the legend's truth, desperately attempted to physically restrain David, but he moved with an unexpected, uncanny strength, his eyes wide and black, utterly empty of his former personality, filled with an alien, serene purpose. He walked calmly, inexorably, into the deepest, darkest part of the ancient forest, disappearing. Without a trace, his footsteps silent as a ghost. The remaining team members, utterly terrified and shattered by what they had witnessed, watched in numb horror as their colleague simply walked into oblivion. Dr. Reed, now gripped by a cold intellectual horror that transcended her scientific training, ordered the remaining team to immediately retreat. They had found their truth, but at a terrible, unforgivable cost. They found the gateway, not as a charming village, but as a small rocky crevice, shrouded in perpetual mist, exhaling a bone-chilling cold draft and that pervasive, nauseating organic smell. Their instruments detected powerful, anomalous energy, readings emanating from deep within, and the hum was almost deafening at its mouth. They left, abandoning their specialized equipment, their scientific skepticism utterly shattered, replaced by a profound, terrifying understanding of a cosmic horror. Dr. Evelyn Reed returned to Vanderbilt, her once illustrious academic career in tatters, her reputation utterly destroyed, her reports meticulously compiled and filled with chilling eyewitness accounts, undeniable scientific data on anomalous energy readings, and the horrifying narrative of David Hughes's inexplicable transformation were summarily dismissed by the university administration as unsubstantiated claims, hysterical ramblings, and egregious academic misconduct. She was immediately forced to resign her position, an outcast from the scientific community. Yet, Dr. Reed, a woman now consumed by a relentless, obsessive need to understand the gateway, continued her research in secret, alone in her small, cluttered apartment, poring over maps and obscure texts. She meticulously correlated other unexplained disappearances in the Appalachian region, noting recurring patterns, individuals experiencing a sudden spreading coldness or an irresistible pull, hearing familiar voices calling their names from the shadows, and then vanishing without a trace, leaving no clues. She discovered that many local legends, often dismissed as mere superstition, spoke of the mountains taking people, or of shadow folk who mimicked human voices, luring the unwary into the depths. She theorized in her private journals that the gateway was not merely a local phenomenon, a single fissure, but perhaps one of many such fissures, ancient portals to an ancient, non-human consciousness, an entity that sought to expand its awareness, its very being, by insidiously subsuming human life and identity. "It is not malevolent in a human sense," she wrote, her hand shaking. "It is simply hungry. It seeks to know, to experience, to become. And we, with our complex consciousness, our vibrant emotions, our unique identities, are merely its most potent food, its most effective means of expansion." She came to believe that the village of Havenwood had been its most successful experiment, a community purposefully bred over centuries to be its constant supply of sustenance, its devoted gatekeepers, ensuring a steady, unending stream of offerings to the maw. Dr. Reed, haunted by her knowledge, eventually vanished herself in 1982, leaving behind only her cryptic, terrifying journals and a profound sense of unease among her few remaining contacts. Her last chilling entry, dated just days before her disappearance, simply stated, "The hum is very strong tonight. It promises answers. It promises peace. It promises understanding beyond human ken. I can no longer resist the call. I will open the gate. I will understand. I will become." In the decades that followed, the haunting, persistent legend of the hidden village and the gateway continued to persist, whispered around flickering campfires and in isolated homesteads evolving, with each telling becoming more terrifying with each new report. Hikers and backpackers venturing into the remote, pristine sections of the Tennessee Appalachians would occasionally report unsettling experiences, an inexplicable, pervasive coldness that permeated their very being, even on warm, sunny days. The sudden onset of profound disorientation, a feeling of being utterly lost in familiar terrain, compasses spinning wildly, their needles pointing nowhere, defying all magnetic laws, and, most disturbingly, hearing familiar voices calling their names from deep within the dense, ancient forest, voices that seemed to resonate directly inside their minds, promising guidance, offering comfort, yet carrying an unsettling, alien undertone, a predatory sweetness. Some reported fleeting glimpses of figures moving silently among the gnarled trees, figures that seemed almost human, yet moved with an unnatural fluidity, their faces indistinct in the perpetual shadows of the ancient woods, their eyes like black holes. Park rangers, hardened by years of wilderness service and accustomed to the vastness and mystery of the wild, began to note a disturbing increase in unexplained disappearances in a specific remote sector of the national forest, the very area where Havenwood was believed to have been located, according to Dr. Reed's maps. These disappearances rarely involved foul play or violence. Individuals simply vanished, leaving behind their carefully arranged campsites, their parked cars, their untouched belongings, as if they had simply walked away, willingly, drawn by an unseen force. In 2015, a small independent team of documentary filmmakers, led by renowned explorer and paranormal researcher Liam O'Connell, a man whose career was built on venturing into the fringes of the unknown, set out to investigate these persistent legends. O'Connell, a seasoned veteran of countless expeditions into the world's most remote and mysterious locations, was initially skeptical but profoundly intrigued by the sheer volume and chilling consistency of the reports. His team, composed of a skilled camera operator, a sound engineer, and a wilderness survival expert, was equipped with state-of-the-art drones, thermal imaging, advanced acoustic sensors, and ground-penetrating radar. They ventured into the heart of the supposed cursed sector, prepared for anything but the truly inexplicable. For days they found nothing but the vast, silent, and increasingly oppressive wilderness. Then their advanced sensors began to pick up anomalous readings, subtle but consistent magnetic fluctuations, unusually low-frequency sonic waves emanating from deep within the earth, and an inexplicable, localized drop in ambient temperature in a specific narrow valley. This was the area where Havenwood was thought to be, the very coordinates Silas Greene and Dr. Reed had pointed to, As they pushed deeper into the valley, battling dense undergrowth and a growing sense of dread, they found it. Not a thriving village, but the faint moss-covered outlines of old log foundations, barely visible beneath centuries of leaf litter, a ghostly echo of what once stood. This was Havenwood. At the foot of a towering, perpetually mist-shrouded peak, just as Silas Greene had described, they found a narrow, jagged crevice, a gaping wound in the mountain's side, shrouded in ancient, twisted trees and thick, impenetrable vines. The Gateway O'Connell's team, their scientific skepticism now irrevocably replaced by a chilling, visceral realization, began to frantically document their findings. Their advanced acoustic sensors, carefully lowered into the abyssal depths of the gateway, recorded not just the now omnipresent hum, but a complex, rhythmic series of sounds, deep guttural thrums, wet gurgles and squelches, and distinct, layered whispers that seemed to pulse and shift, like a living organism breathing. Sophisticated spectral analysis of these recordings, performed on site by the trembling sound engineer, revealed something profoundly disturbing. The whispers contained coherent, repetitive phrases, not in any known human language, but clearly organized, almost like a form of alien conscious communication. And within these alien patterns, fainter but undeniably present, were human voices, layered within the alien hum. Distorted, elongated, echoing fragments of English words, fragments of hymns, fragments of desperate pleas, fragments of laughter, of cries, of names. And most terrifying of all, Liam O'Connell, listening intently through the noise-canceling headphones, his face pale with horror, clearly heard his own name, whispered by a multitude of voices, both familiar and alien, from the deep. Liam, join us. Be with us. Know us. Become us. That night, as the team camped in a terrified silence near the gateway, O'Connell experienced a profound, pervasive coldness that started in his left hand and slowly spread up his arm, numbing it, invading his very core. He also began to hear whispers directly in his mind, not just from the recordings, but intimately, personally, calling his name, promising forbidden knowledge, profound understanding, and an end to all striving, all suffering, if he would only embrace the mountain's embrace, surrender to the song. He saw fleeting shadows at the very edge of their roaring campfire, figures that seemed to shift and coalesce, almost taking on human form, but never quite, their movements fluid and unnatural. His team members, though physically unharmed, also reported feeling the insidious coldness and the profound disorientation, their minds teetering on the brink of madness. One of them, the young sound engineer, began to stare blankly into the oppressive shadows, muttering incoherently about the song of the deep and the peace it offers. His eyes glazed over. Liam O'Connell, a man of extraordinary will and hardened resolve, fought with every fiber of his being against the insidious mental assault, the seductive whispers, the creeping cold. He realized with a clarity that brought him to the edge of madness that the gateway was not merely a physical fissure, but a nexus of alien consciousness, an ancient, non-human entity that sought to expand its awareness, its very being, by insidiously subsuming human life and identity, merging them into its own vast, unknowable whole. The villagers of Havenwood, the lost prospectors, the vanished CCC workers, the obsessed Dr. Reed, they hadn't just disappeared. They had been absorbed, their individual consciousnesses, their souls, merged into the horrific collective awareness of the maw, becoming its extensions, its willing or unwilling gatekeepers, ensuring a continuous stream of offerings, of new minds. They were the voices that called, the shadows that watched, the lures that beckoned, forever trapped within the mountain's living embrace. O'Connell, knowing the immense existential danger they all faced, made the agonizing decision to immediately abandoned the expedition, sacrificing his lifelong dream of a groundbreaking discovery to save his remaining team, his sanity, and perhaps their very souls. They left in a frenzied haste, destroying all their specialized recording equipment, their drones, their sensors, near the gateway, hoping to cut off the entity's ability to project its insidious influence to sever the connection. As they fled the valley, pushing themselves to the breaking point, O'Connell felt the coldness recede, the whispers lessen, but he knew he was forever marked, his mind forever scarred by what he had witnessed. Liam O'Connell survived, but like Silas Greene and Dr. Evelyn Reed before him, he was profoundly and irrevocably changed. His groundbreaking documentary was never completed, his findings too terrifying, too unbelievable for the mainstream. He spent the rest of his life advocating passionately for the protection of remote wilderness areas, often speaking cryptically about places where the veil between worlds is thin and ancient hungers that wait patiently, silently, in the deep places. He never explicitly mentioned Havenwood or the Gateway in public, but his warnings were clear, desperate, and unmistakable. Some secrets are best left undisturbed. Some places are not meant for human exploration. Some doors should remain forever closed. He claimed that even decades later, he would sometimes feel a faint phantom coldness in his left hand and hear the echo of distant whispers, promising peace, offering knowledge, calling his name from the deepest recesses of his mind. He kept a small, smooth river stone picked up near the gateway, always in his pocket, a tactile, chilling reminder of the forbidden border he had crossed. The area where Havenwood once stood is now officially designated as a wilderness preserve, access heavily restricted due to unstable geological conditions and rare protected flora, bureaucratic euphemisms for something far more sinister. Local park rangers are reportedly given vague but firm instructions to avoid a certain anomalous valley deep within the forest, and unexplained equipment malfunctions, strange navigational errors, and a pervasive sense of unease continue to plague the few who venture too close. Yet the mountain stands, silent and brooding, its ancient secret still humming deep within its heart, a living, breathing entity. And somewhere, perhaps, the transformed inhabitants of Havenwood, the Gatekeepers, still watch, their empty eyes fixed on the distant paths, waiting patiently, silently, for new travelers, new minds, new souls to offer to the maw. What truly happened to the people of Havenwood? Were they victims of a mass delusion, a bizarre, isolated cult, or an ancient, non-human entity seeking to expand its consciousness by insidiously assimilating human life? The official records offer no answers, only silence. But the mountains remember, and sometimes, if you listen closely to the wind that sweeps through the Appalachian peaks, you might hear a faint, rhythmic hum, a collective whisper, promising peace, offering knowledge, calling your name. And if you hear it, remember the fate of Havenwood, remember the cost of curiosity, remember the terror of assimilation, and whatever you do, do not answer the call. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us for more content like this.